everybody, and today I want to talk about genre as it applies to the Gospel of Mark and narrative sequence as it applies to a specific genre of narrative. Now, genre is a type of literature. We know it today as a murder mystery or maybe a love story, but there are also different genres in the Bible and the New Testament, and it's important that we understand which genre we're working with in a gospel because we need to use the rules of that genre to understand the particular piece of literature we're looking at. And I'll give you an example of why the rules are important. If you were going to play football, but you were going to use the rules of baseball to play football, it would get very confusing in a hurry. We wouldn't know which kind of field to play on. If you scored a touchdown, was that worth 6 points or was that a home run? We have to use the rules of football to understand football, the rules of baseball to understand baseball. And when we're looking at a gospel, we need to use the rules of gospel to understand gospel. Now, gospel is a narrative. It's a story. Now, when I say story, don't misunderstand me. I don't mean it's a fairy tale and not true, but it's a narrative sequence of events using plot and characters to tell a story. And that's what Mark is doing in his gospel. So we have to use the rules of narrative to understand. And one of the things we're going to be looking at is sequence. So Mark knew an awful lot of things about Jesus, but he only had a certain amount of room in his gospel. He took 16 chapters to tell the story of Jesus. So he had to pick and choose which events to tell us about in the life of Jesus. Certainly didn't tell us about anything. He had to pick a place where to start. He didn't start with the birth of Jesus. He had to pick a place where to end with the resurrection. It kind of makes sense. But what he included in between, he had to choose to meet the needs of his audience. This is what his audience needed to know about Jesus. And secondly, I think it's important because the sequence he told those events in is also important. It helps tell his story. Now, yes, he followed roughly a chronological order of Jesus' life from the beginning of his ministry to his end, but he had to decide which events to put together to tell the story. And I think that sequence can be important for our interpretation. And I'll give you a good example. Everybody open your Bibles to Mark 5:1. This is the story of the Gerasene demoniac. The Sea of Galilee is in northern Israel, and there is a Jewish side to the Sea of Galilee, the western side, and there is a Gentile side to the Sea of Galilee, the eastern side. So in Mark 5:1, he's crossed over the Sea of Galilee from the Jewish side to the Gentile side, and he's going to have an encounter with this demoniac. Now, we know it's the Gentile side because it has pigs on it, and you don't meet very many good Jewish pig farmers. They for some reason, have this problem with farming pigs. So Jesus is on the east side. He's talking to a Gentile, and if we go to Mark 5:1, we get the story of the Gerasene demoniac. Now, most people would start preaching or teaching or learning from Mark 5:1, and they'd say, well, what's the meaning of the Gerasene demoniac story? And we'll talk about that later as we go through Mark in detail. But what Jesus is doing here and what Mark is showing Jesus doing here is something more than that. If we just start at 5:1, we sort of miss the point. Now, if you open your Bibles to Mark 5:1, what I'd like you to do is go back to Mark 4, about 41. It's the last verse in Mark 4. And you have to remember that when the Bible was written, when Mark wrote his gospel, he didn't have chapter divisions or verse divisions. He sat down to write it, and he wrote the whole thing. So there is no original division between Mark 4:41 and Mark 5:1. And if we really want to know what Mark 5:1 is about, we've got to go back to Mark 4:41. And this is the story of the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And it ends with a question. And the disciples ask, look at Mark 4:41. They say, they became very much afraid and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and sea obey him? Now, so Mark 4 ends with a question. Now, in the normal course of events, if someone asks a question, the next thing you would expect is for that question to be answered. So sometimes I think when we start our study at Mark 5:1, we lose the point because really this is a continuation from Mark 4:41. And in Mark 4:41, he's asked a question. So the most natural thing we would expect in Mark 4:42 or Mark 5:1, if you kind of catch my drift there, is the answer to the question. So if we understand the literary context, the sequence of events, the value of genre in the narrative, we know that what Mark is really doing in Mark 5 is answering a question that he ended Mark 4 with. So the whole point of Mark 5 is, who is this guy Jesus? The winds obey him, the seas obey him, and we'll see in Mark 5, even the demons obey him. And Jesus is the kind of person who can rescue someone for a demon and leave him in his right mind, being prepared to be a disciple. So if we understand the sequence of events, we start to understand why Mark is telling us the story a little bit more, and we've kind of got a handle on the interpretation. Now, that takes nothing away from the importance of the Gerasene demoniac story, but it gives us a foundation on which to understand it. And it is a story that Mark is giving us in sequence to answer the question of who this guy Jesus is. So if we really want to understand what Mark's doing, we should read the Gerasene demoniac with who is this guy Jesus in the background and what can he do. So I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea how sequence can be important. And I would challenge you to read the rest of Mark with sequence in mind and see if you can start seeing events where the sequence is important. And there are an awful lot of them in Mark. I don't think you'll have trouble finding one. So when you find one, share it on the group forum. Let us join you in the joy of finding that and see if it helps us with the interpretation. So until next time, bye-bye.